Hey everyone, I'm Gavin Vengeance, and welcome back to MyXP. Today I want to talk about Final Fantasy V, which is a little bit of a strange one for me because it didn't come out here in the West until it was part of the Final Fantasy Anthology Collection on the PlayStation 1. And that wasn't really the first time that I ever got to play it. It was exposed to me, I guess, when I was a little bit younger. I guess I was probably my mid-teens, and I just finished playing Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation. Around that time, I used to hang around with a friend, and he was really big into RPGs as well. So I'd always go over to his house, and we'd play, games on N64, or he'd come over to my house and we'd play games on my PlayStation because he didn't have a PlayStation at the time. I didn't have an N64 at the time. But we'd always end up going back and forth to each other's house and trying out different games. And he always had access to a lot of other games because at that time, having a computer, believe it or not, wasn't really something that was commonplace where I'm from. And he had a computer, so he would always be, looking for the latest and greatest games and find any kind of news on any other games that would have been coming over west from Japan. And he ended up getting into emulation and stuff like that. So the very first time that I ever got exposed to Final Fantasy V was through my friend Jamie. He ended up getting Super Nintendo emulator, and he ended up getting the ROM for Final Fantasy V. So initially, that was my first impressions of it. It was just like a fan translation that they had done. Nothing official at that point. So that's pretty much what my first impressions were based off of. And I only got to play a small portion of that game at the time at his house because I'd always have to go over and play it with him whenever he wanted to play that game. So I didn't really get a whole lot of hands-on time with it, unfortunately, not until the PlayStation 1 Final Fantasy Anthology Collection came out. And when that came out, I knew immediately I had to pick it up. It had my favorite Final Fantasy of all time, which I'll talk to in the next video, or talk about in the next video, and that's Final Fantasy VI. So as soon as I saw that they had that, I said, you know what, I'm going to grab Final Fantasy Anthology, try out Final Fantasy V, the official English release, and then I'll have my own opinion of it. So I tried out Final Fantasy V. You start off in the forest with Bartz and Boko. Well, I guess you get the opening cutscene with Reyna and the dragon and her father's leaving for the Wind Temple, and I really liked the atmosphere of it, and it had really great storytelling. So it kind of slowly led you into the game, and you got, a little sense of urgency there when, you meet up with Reyna, and then she's trying to get to the Wind Temple, and then you end up meeting with Galuf at the Meteor, and then, yeah, you end up, parting ways because Bart's is nah, I don't want any of that. And then, they ended up bumping into each other, not even a minute later into the game. And then he's like, you know what, yeah, maybe I will go to the Wind Temple as well. But I kind of liked how it was, the pacing of the game, all in all. It was pretty much, how do I say this? Everything just kind of was fluid. It just, everything took you by the hand and led you to the next part of the game. And it was really nice to actually see the job system return as well. Because I remember in Final Fantasy III, I found that was one of the best things that I ever seen. I was like, oh wow, you can do different actions whenever you change your job, and there were so many different jobs to experience. And then Final Fantasy V went and took that system and improved upon it and added even more jobs that you could try out. And then if you got multiple jobs at a certain level, you could end up taking the ability from one job or, some kind of passive action and actually slotting in that into another job, which was awesome because then you could kind of do a subclass. And for me, I really enjoyed that system. It was nice to be able to expand upon what one character could do, and all four of your characters were a lot more versatile. It was really great, and I wasn't really expecting to be as blown away by a game that came out, a few years earlier than my favorite at that time, which was Final Fantasy VII. I love Final Fantasy VI, don't get me wrong, but that first eye-opener to Final Fantasy VII was just mind-blowing for me. So it was nice to actually go back to the roots, like the Super Nintendo era, and see something that I knew I would have probably gravitated more towards even the 6 back at that point. But I ended up trying that out, and I went through the entire game. It was fantastic from start to finish. The only complaint that I really had about the game, I guess, is one song in particular I found very repetitive, and I usually don't complain about Nobuo Uematsu's music because he's a genius. He's created some of the best songs that I've ever heard in terms of anything, any form of media, and a lot of them just get stuck in your head. But it's just that that one hurry up type theme or whatever. It's really annoying, to me at least. But, you know, Final Fantasy V, like I said, it definitely did have its part in my life. And I'll always hold on to that memory of, you know, always going back and forth to my friend's house to try out a game and then, you know, being introduced to something that I wasn't familiar with at the time or I didn't even know or knew exists because, you know, we got Final Fantasy 3 in North America and then all of a sudden it was Final Fantasy 7 and you were like, well, what happened to 4, 5, 6? But, like I said, it was nice to go back and actually see something like Final Fantasy 5, you know, the pretty much sparked my nostalgia for great games like Final Fantasy VI that I grew up with. But I really did like it, and you know we also got the introduction of great characters like Gilgamesh, and I didn't really think much of him at the time when I first got to fight Gilgamesh in Final Fantasy V, but you know eventually that became a staple of the series. He was more of the joke character with Final Fantasy X and you know Final Fantasy XII and other iterations of that character, but it was really really nice. Like I said, you got to see a lot of things introduced in Final Fantasy V, and it actually changed up the formula, I guess, for Final Fantasies to come afterward. But that's pretty much my experience with Final Fantasy V. Outside of that, there's not really a whole lot else I can go off the top of my head. But yeah, fantastic game nonetheless. And next episode, I'll be talking to you guys about Final Fantasy VI. So thank you again for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Click the bell icon if you want notifications whenever I upload my next one. And I'll see you guys next time.